Good afternoon. This is California Convictions. I'm live streaming. I'm Aaron Channel. I speak regularly about my experiences while I was incarcerated. Generally, I speak about anything people want to talk about, and of course, if anybody had a question, they can go ahead and toss it out in the comments. That said, today I want to speak directly and specifically about hate crimes. Whenever I was originally arrested, I was charged with a hate crime. They gave me a piece of paper, my arrest record, and hate crime was one of the 4 charges. They also had carjacking, murder, kidnapping, murder, robbery, murder. The hate crime legislation would have been a federal referral, and it was immediately dropped. The reason why is that I was alleged to have murdered my victim, Donald Perez, because of his sexual orientation, specifically that he was a gay man. This was untrue, and untrue to the point that it still breaks my heart to talk about it. And it's why I'm going to speak pretty directly about my case on this occasion. I have here, and I don't know how well you'll be able to read it, I'll scan it at some point. This is a flyer that was put up for the protest that was going to occur during my trial. I'll read it. Please join us to say no to hate. Say no to hate crimes in our community. Saturday, June 22nd, bearing in mind this is right during my trial. In front of Town Hall, a memorial vigil in remembrance of Donald Perez, a 39-year-old gay man who was robbed, tortured, and murdered by 3 Fort Bragg men in September of 2001. Please bring signs expressing your feelings and something to add to an altar in memory of Donald and the many lesbians and gay men murdered for daring to be themselves. One last thing I'm going to show, and maybe I'll scan this at some point too. I doubt you'll be able to see it, but this is a picture of the large stuffed animal. You can't see the $12,000 in camera equipment. That's what I was told. It's what we were alleged to have stolen. That this dude brought to my rural community from the city with the express intent of having sex with and videotaping a child. The picture I showed was a big stuffed animal, a Tasmanian devil, buckled into the back seat of his car. I don't know what the plan was for that thing, but I am appalled to this day that monster, that piece of garbage, was somehow conflated with such a decent and normal thing as somebody being homosexual, whatever they are, whatever orientation, whatever identity they are, and being tortured and murdered for it. It's not the same thing. Sex is sex. People do what they want to do as long as it is consensual, and there is no consent between an adult and a child, ever. That's perverse and monstrous. It is not a normal activity. As it turned out, in 2001, there was not laws that would have allowed me to be prosecuted, even if I had done what was alleged, what the prosecutor said that I did, that I was supposed to have been involved in this man's murder because he was gay, that I just had such a problem with people being gay. They changed those laws in 2009. Was the Matthew Shepard case. It finally got around to being codified into bill, and now you can be prosecuted, executed for hate crimes. And rightly so. Somebody who chooses to commit that type of harm to somebody just based on their orientation, just based on their identity, just based on who they are, that is wrong, and I'm glad that the laws have changed. They dropped the hate crime charge against me immediately because I did not fall under the context, even if I had done what they alleged. They didn't have those laws back then. Just as one final thing on this before I move on to... I had so many friends who were openly non-traditional in their sexual orientation. Perhaps they were gay, lesbians, bi, trans, whatever they are. I had people writing letters to the court saying it was absurd that they'd been my friends and known me for as long as you could know somebody, and that I had not an ounce hate in me against these groups. But the district attorney elected to use this toxic narrative because it would be a lot easier to sell in court to a jury than the idea that this guy had been murdered not because of his orientation, but because he was a pedophile. Or if you prefer, the term nowadays that is being bandied about is minor attracted person. I'm fine with the term. The group can call themselves whatever they want. But the idea that they're a protected class, that you can say, well, it's not my fault, I like to hurt and ruin the lives of children, it's just who I am, is an absurdity. And I feel pretty confident that anybody who is any of these actual protected classes doesn't want pedophiles in their group in any context. The district attorney's decision to conflate this monster was erroneous, wrong-headed, and inherently evil. It contributed to my lengthy prison sentence. The district attorney in my case did not go on to do great things, but this was definitely a low point in his life in my mind. I'm sorry. That is the length to which I'll speak about that one very specific topic. Though I will add that under the new Matthew Shepard law, which passed in 2009, so it's newish, I suppose, sexual orientation is a protected class, which means that people who are gay or lesbian or whatever they might be, absolutely, if you hurt them, if you commit a crime against them or their property in any manner because of who they are, you can be charged with a hate crime. But the phrase sexual orientation as written in the law, and I went to the FBI website and very carefully read what their standards are on this, pedophiles perhaps could qualify. Minor attracted person. Somebody could argue in court, well, children is an orientation, and then they would be a protected class. It would be a hate crime. I don't know how that can be changed. I don't know how you can reword a bill. But boy, I really do wish it was explicitly and coherently stated that being enraged, repulsed, and perhaps even committing a crime whenever you find out that somebody recreationally, just because it's what they enjoy, tortures children, that's not the same thing as hate. That is a rational and reasonable response to an awful reality. I suppose I'm going to have to extemporize in some way. If I'm being honest, I thought I had about 15 minutes of things to say about just that awful chunk in my life. I don't. I had about 8. I'd like to speak for about a half hour. I happen to have my legal folder with me. Every inmate has something like this. This is just where I keep a lot of my legal paperwork, things that are important. On this side, of course, I have that awful stinking flyer that they put up suggesting that they needed to rally together and picket during my trial to try and make sure that I was properly convicted of the awful thing I was accused of doing. Here on the other side, and again, I doubt that it's able to be seen very clearly, but I'm sure that I will post it at some point, is the Free Aaron Channel bumper sticker that my wife and a couple of friends would have liked to be able to get out there as a more decent piece of propaganda. A Shaliste girl asks where the flyer came from, and it had been posted in a local grocery market in my hometown. I'm under the understanding that there had been a number of others put out, and it was put out by a decent organization and decent people who were trying to draw attention to real nasty things. They just picked me as the wrong target. I am not the person they should have been targeting. This was, again, and I've pointed out before, in the aftermath of the Matthew Shepard case. Donald Perez was murdered on October 5th, and I was arrested on September 14th of 2001. This is just after 9/11, and just a while after the Matthew Shepard case, a case in which a person was murdered brutally because of their sexual orientation and identity because of who they were, and that crime should have been prosecuted as a hate crime. I may have been charged, but thankfully the facts did not support the interpretation that was being bandied about by the district attorney, and even if they had, the laws had not advanced to that point that I properly could have been prosecuted for a hate crime. I got to occasionally get up in the morning and be productive, of course. We have to make that list of things that we have to do. Today was an exciting day for me. Today was Write Some Inmates Day. I try not to get on the computer and put letters together too regularly because you can spam somebody. Some of the people that I write, I haven't heard back from. One of my cellies that I like, Wolf, I mentioned him a couple of times, and he was older, he was retired, but dude was a killer in a real way. And I don't mean that as an insult, because he seemed perfectly respectful and respectable. I never had a problem with him. But there was never a doubt in my mind that if I had, before I went to bed, told him, "Hey, Wolf, I've been thinking about it, and you're a piece of garbage and a punk and a bitch, and fuck you and everything you stand for, man. Good night," I would not have woken up the next morning, because he would have been up sharpening a piece until 2 in the morning, and he would have shown me what he stood for. We wouldn't have had an interaction like that, because, again, I had a lot of respect for the guy. He was a respectful and decent guy. He'd been involved in some of that white power stuff whenever he was younger, but he was retired whenever I knew him. It's the reason we celled up, is he knew that even though I was a youngster, I wasn't in the mix. I wasn't causing problems. And so we got along great. I wrote him again this morning. He's in his 70s now, and he's in a medical facility, so I'm not actually sure that he's capable of writing me back. And also, remember, I went out sideways. I was in protective custody, so I'm not sure he'd want to write me back. But he's one of the people that I wrote again today, and I'm excited to hopefully hear from him. Additionally, I wrote Scooby, and all I did was just check with the verbiage of the small GoFundMe commercial that I'm making for him, expressing his case and how we're hoping to get together money to get him an attorney whenever he goes back to board. I wanted to make sure that he approved of the exact words that I intend to use in the commercial, because the last thing that I'd want to do is speak on his behalf and say something he didn't want said. You know, the beginning of this was so heavy, so nasty, and I hate talking about the hate crime aspect of my case, the idea that I was accused of torturing and murdering a gay man just because of who he was. I hate that. I'm going to tell a funny story instead, because I do have some funny stories. Whenever I originally envisioned talking on YouTube about prison, I thought it was going to be fun. I thought that I'd tell some of the funny stuff that I had experienced, like the story about Prid, the white power knucklehead with misspelt tattoos all over him. It's an inherently funny story. The problem is that most of the stories involving prison, they're also nasty, terrible stories. The story about Prid, though it is funny, involves racism. It involves somebody who's of a very low IQ being taken advantage of by an organized group. It's a sad story, too. Well, I got one story that I tell every once in a while, which is just funny by and large. I had a cellie, Lizard Man. Lizard Man was a cool dude. He had 2 pet lizards that he'd picked up off the yard, and he'd had them for a year. It's called them Big and Little, because they were big and little comparatively. They fought all the time. They hated each other, and they're lizards, I guess. They may not have that deep of an emotional life. But he loved those pets. He was my cellie. One thing that California inmates have to deal with is something called restitution. You owe the state money for going to prison. If you committed a crime against a person or property, you owe them for starters. Maybe it's not much, but if you broke a window, they expect you to pay for that window. In my case, I didn't break a window. I was alleged to have ended a man's life. That's a lot of money. You start with $10,000 in court fees, and then they expected me, myself, and my 2 co-defendants each to pay about $4,000 in direct damages to the victim's family. That's $14,000, and I did manage to get that paid off. But until I had paid it off, any money that I had sent to myself to pay for whatever it might be. Food, toys, books, college. The state takes half of it, right off the top. They take half of the money that you have sent in. This was a period in time whenever money was particularly tight for me, and I couldn't afford to pay that half. So, I asked my celly lizard man, hey dude, you don't owe restitution. Listen man, if I sent you $100, could you just buy me stuff at the canteen? And I'll get you something. I'll get you some candy bars or a jar of coffee or whatever you want. And I'd rather give you $20 out of my 100 than have the state take $50 out of my 100. Lizard man, he and I got along great. Shook hands, no problem. So I wrote my people, said, hey guys, send $100 to this guy. Here's his information. No problem. One day, Lizard man is at work. He worked as a porter. And the cop comes by and goes, hey Channel, this is for your celly. It's mail. Can you give it to him when he gets in? This is not that uncommon. Your cop doesn't want to deliver mail twice a day. So if you're not there whenever he comes by, he just slides it in the door or gives it to your celly. Told him, yeah, sure, no problem. Took the envelope. And what it was a letter from my people to him. I go, oh, this must be the money that I had sent. And sure enough, I look at the back and there's a little stamp. There was a check for $100 in this. We removed it and placed it on your account, Lizard Man. Of course, it didn't say that exactly, but that was what it meant. The letter is sealed, but there's just a little crack at the end. The cops did not properly reseal it. And so I blow in there and look, and there's no letter. My family didn't send a letter saying, hey, here's that money for you. They just sent the money. So I sit down with a pen and a paper, and I write out real quick, and I can remember exactly what I wrote. Dear Mr. Lizard Man, here's the $100 Aaron owes you. Please don't stab him. I understand you've been threatening to kill him over this money. Here's the money. Please don't stab him. I write this out and I scrawl a little signature at the bottom. I fold it up real tight and I slide it into the envelope and unfold it. So it looks like this came from the streets. It came in, the cops inspected it, took copies of it, and then gave it to him. You have to understand, Lizard Man is a lifer. Being a lifer is a scary thing. You make a little mistake, you get upset one day and a cop says, hey, you lie down right now. And you say, screw you, I'm having a bad day. You're going to end up in prison for like 5 years more, 10 years more over that. Because the cop's going to make a report. And whenever you go into board and say, hey, I'm reformed, I'm rehabilitated, I'd like to get out of prison, they're going to say, we don't think you are. It's just 2 years ago you got into trouble about this thing. You still have a temper. You got to stay in prison for a while longer. Lizard Man comes home. Oh, hey, Lizard Man, you got mail. Oh, it's the $100. Cool. There's a letter in here. He opens it up. And I'm planning on playing this out for a little while as a practical joke, but I see his face. He's reading and goes, and I know what's in his head. He's thinking the cops made a copy of this and they're going to write him up for extorting me. He's not going to get out of prison for his whole life. This is like 5 years left in his sentence. I didn't drag it out. This wasn't 2 seconds. I go, oh my God, no, it's okay. Hey, it's a joke, man. I put that letter in there. Nobody else saw it, I swear. And there was about 3 seconds of him, you're fucking with me? He threw his head back and laughed. As it turned out, Lizard Man and I were only cellies for a couple of months. As it turned out, I saw him 10 years later, just a little while before I paroled. And he was still telling that story to people. I told him, hey, Lizard Man, remember me? He ran over, gave me a hug, went, oh my God, I got to call my celly over here. Called his celly over, said, this is Aaron. This is the guy that did that prank. I suppose it is a little sad, a little awful that, you can have your life really impacted that much in prison by a little thing. But on the other hand, it's the responsibility of the parole board to be certain that you are not going to reoffend whenever they parole you. The fact that they have very high standards for that determination is not an awful thing. Shelton Chang, Vegas Prison Stories, and Gina Lester, At Least a Girl. Thank all you guys for checking in. I am scanning the comments. Okay, well, I managed to fill up 20 minutes with extemporary speech, but I really did just want to speak about the awful nature of my original charges because I've been thinking about hate crimes and the nature of them recently. I expect that I'm going to do a video at some point, perhaps very soon, specifically on hate crimes and whether pedophiles, minor attracted persons if you prefer, should be a protected class under the law. And more importantly, whether they are a protected class under the law. Because again, the Matthew Shepard Act of, I believe it was 2009, specifies that sexual orientation is a protected group. You cannot victimize somebody because of their sexual orientation. I am for that. That is a perfectly reasonable thing. However, a pedophile can argue that his sexual orientation is children. And I am absolutely against the idea that that would be a reasonable stance to take in court. Pedophiles are not a protected class. They should not be, and I think that needs to be codified very specifically into the bill, because as it stands now, it could be interpreted that manner. It is ambiguous wording. I did 16 and a half years. You'll have to excuse me, my throat. I did 16 and a half years in CDCR. I'll tell you a number of interesting experiences that I had involved having honest and open conversations with monsters. By and large, they were killers. Wolf is an example. And again, I don't have anything to say ill against him. All I can speak of is what I saw. And as far as I saw, he was just a hard man. He treated you with respect, you treated him with respect, and there were no problems. Even if just, you were the type of guy who couldn't always be respectful, maybe you had a fast mouth, well, he just distanced from you. He wasn't looking for a problem. It's just that murder was a tool in his toolbox. If he had a problem with you, it was going to be a final problem. It was only going to be one time he had to explain to you what the problem was, and no one was ever going to have to explain it to you a second time. Other people that I had conversations with, and I always tried to tell people, look, I'm just interested. Tell me about your life. There's nothing neater than being able to talk to a burglar openly about his crimes. Have him tell you all the little tricks that he learned, the things he got away with, and not because I'm, educating myself and I'm planning on being a burglar whenever I get out. But if you think about it, inmates, they're only honest with each other. The idea that everybody is walking around Shawshank prison claiming to be innocent, there are no guilty men in Shawshank, it's not true. They might tell the guards they're innocent. They might tell their counselor, they might tell their family, they might even write their friends on the outside and say, I didn't do it. But whenever you got 10 inmates sitting in a room just gabbing, what's the point, man? We know you're lying. We all know you're lying. Or maybe there's the one dude out of 20 going, no, really, I didn't do it. And then you start asking him, well, what did you do? They arrested you for something, right? I mean, you didn't just get picked out of a crowd. So being able to have an honest conversation with a criminal about their crimes, it's an exciting thing. It's an interesting thing. I recall one burglar that I spoke to, and I asked him, hey, just tell me a story, man. Tell me about you got away with something one time. And he didn't have a story about getting away, but he had a story about coming this close. He'd been robbing a house in a low-income housing project, which means that they were large duplexes, all built one after the other in big rows back and forth. And he thought that he had a clean entry into a house, that he'd found a window that was a little bit open and that he'd be able to get into. And so what he did was he put on a pair of coveralls that he kept in his backpack, which appeared to be business coveralls. They were whatever, he'd stolen them from some business or whatever. We can say he was a cable installation guy is what he looked like. And he had a stepladder that he kept in the back of his truck. And so he parked just a block away, and he carried the stepladder to the back of this guy's house whenever he knew he wasn't there, set the stepladder down, opened the window, climbed in, reached around, pulled the stepladder in after him, and closed the window. This was his process for getting into a house. And then what he'd do is he'd spend 15 or 20 minutes in the house looking for something valuable, but ideally the safe with $50,000 and a bunch of gold in it, but this is low income housing. So really he's looking to steal their TV or their Xbox or whatever it is at the time. He looked out the window as he was looking for things to steal, and he saw a cop walking around the house. Quick as he could, he hit the ground and started looking for some place to hide. Somebody had seen him go in and called the cops. And now they're knocking on the door. Sir, ma'am, is anybody in there? We had a report of a prowler. He knows how this goes. They don't go away. If the cops think that there's a burglar in a home, they'll hang out outside the place. They'll eventually come in if they have to. They'll garrison the whole neighborhood if they have to. So he started looking for some place to hide. That's his next step. He can't run, he's got to hide. These are duplexes. It occurs to him that the closet of the master bedroom has to be touching the closet of the master bedroom of the house on the other side. The houses are joined. So he gets himself a mirror and he cuts a hole in the wall of the bedroom, just an itty bitty one, and climbs through into the neighbor's house, who thankfully was not home. He then pulls the mirror to the door behind him and attaches it as best as he can by leaning it against and then pulling it tight and securing it with a shoestring. He can hear the cops by now in the house looking around. Come out, we know you're in here, where are you? And it's forever. 5, 10, 15 minutes. He hears them going through the house, up in the attic, everywhere. Finally, he hears, all right, we found the hole. Come out now or we're coming in. They'd found the hole in the back of the window. He gave himself up at that point. He knew he was caught. But as he was being let out in handcuffs, he says the officer laughed and told him, man, you are the unluckiest dude. Do you know we had actually said he must not be in here and we're turning around to leave? Whenever we looked and noticed a little piece of drywall there on the ground in the closet, just a little fleck that you hadn't cleaned up behind you. So we moved that mirror to check. Clever, fun. Another, I guess, funny, though, again, it's hard to tell funny stories about prison, crime, and criminality because they're not funny. This dude broke into one person's house, tried to steal their property, and then he snuck into another person's house, and if that person had been home, perhaps awful things would have happened. This is the nature of the beast. It's where I was. People tell funny stories about things that are intrinsically unfunny. Whenever I'd originally started this channel, I'd hoped I was going to be telling some of those funny stories, like this here burglar almost getting away with it. I may tell more in the future. I generally restrict these live streams to about a half hour. I'm going to close here, but thank you for listening.